Good. Welcome everybody to Merry Musings 12, the last in the series, this one on crop circles. And interestingly, when I designed the series originally, I thought I'd put the crop circles at the end, really because we'd have just had a summer of crop circles. And also because it, I don't know, didn't kind of seem to fit with some of the others, but was one that I was really interested in. I have for a long time been interested in actually, and have kind of read a bit about and experienced directly, and felt like musing about a bit. So, I thought it'd be a nice one to finish the series. It turns out that as I was going through it and kind of working out how to present my understandings of it, and then looking in particular at this book, Lucy Pringle and James Lyons' book, that all the different pieces started to fall together, you know, like things that relate to many of the Merry Musings, but in particular, the Volution Theory, which was my PhD dissertation at Ubiquity's Wisdom School, and which there is a Merry Musing for earlier in the series, which essentially tries to describe, you know, the process of manifestation. So Volution Theory goes into how things move from the informational subtle realms into the manifest realm, how that whole process goes essentially, and proposes that volution, which is more of a toroidal breathing movement, is a more adequate way of understanding the way life works than evolution or even involution, both of which are framed in a fairly linear process, that is actually one process. It spins and breathes like a torus, and we could call it volution. So when I discovered, was kind of working out how to frame the theories around how crop circles are made, particularly James Lyons' work, I saw how it coincided strongly with the Volution Theory, which was a lovely gift and a nice way to wrap it all up. So I'll leave you in suspense until we come to that bit towards the end of the talk. So to start with a story, we were in England one summer on a wisdom school, Ubiquity Wisdom School program that I'd organized around Avebury and Stonehenge in the southwest of England, looking at crop circles and these stone circles that are based down that way. And Kaylin, who is on the call and was with us then, we you know, were doing various things around the crop circles and looking to see if we could manifest them in different ways and things like that. Now, this event was the week before the annual mystery school that Ubiquity's Wisdom School holds in Chartres. This is the Chartres Cathedral that you can see now. And so once we'd finished the week in the southwest of England, you know, most of us kind of headed up and caught the train under the channel across to France to go to Chartres. And the day, I think it may even actually be the day itself that we arrived in Chartres, having been doing all this work around Avebury and the crop circles and things, this crop circle showed up. So if you look at it, the first phase was the one on the left. You'll notice it looks rather like a cathedral. And underneath it has those drops. And there is a theory that there are a number of large menhirs underneath the Chartres Cathedral, because before there was a cathedral planted on top of that hill, it was a grove of trees where all the druids from Europe used to collect to have their annual ceremonies. So then what happened is we got this second phase with this great angel kind of coming out of the top spire of the cathedral. And then the final phase included, you'll see right at the bottom, a large menhir shape, which is also part apparently of the structure of the cathedral, is a large kind of single menhir underneath it all. So Now, that was hard to, the coincidence, if this had just been pure chance, would have been remarkable that we'd just been doing this work. And this particular crop circle showed up just in the area where we'd been exploring as well. That this crop circle that looked remarkably like Chartres Cathedral would suddenly appear like that. So that was a very interesting synchronicity that kind of sealed a week, as it were, of experience with the crop circles that made a really significant impact on many of the people who were there. We should do it again one day. So what I want to do at the beginning is just to share a little bit about what people have noticed about the crop circles, certain characteristics of them, as it were. And then we'll go into looking at theories around how they actually form, and then the link to Volution Theory and in general the manifestation process on Earth. So there's been a lot of reports of healing inside crop circles, generally temporary, sometimes longer term. So often people get healed of an ailment and then, a day or two later, it kind of comes back. The theories are that the crop circles radiate certain frequencies. So this will be a theme through the talk, of these electromagnetic frequencies that the crop circles radiate, and that those could be responsible for interacting with the electromagnetic frequencies in the body. And for some reason, where there is a dysfunction in that electromagnetic field in the body, the crop circle energy seems to fix it. That then leads to a healing of the illness or the issue that somebody had. And they all work differently for different people. So it's not this crop circle does this or this does that. It's really personalized healthcare for you. However, it's not always positive. So people do come out sometimes with negative effects. So it's really part of what they found, and Lucy Pringle talks about, is the importance of listening to your intuition as you consider going into a crop circle as to whether it is one that would be appropriate for you or not. So as a quote from the book, separately tuned circles resonate with the neural structure of the brain and show how in principle crop circle energy yields the synergistic energy fields which can realign or retune the human being's fundamental harmonic structure. So the suggestion is that the energy patterns have a kind of natural design to them in the crop circles, and those can help to reset, as it were, any energies in our own systems that are not functioning properly. People will also take different crop circle images, so you can also, obviously the crop circle itself has an information field associated with it. And you can access that information field not just by being there physically, but through resonance with the crop circle itself as a photo, as an image in what we would call a resonator. And so people will douse different crop circle images to see which one might help with a different illness, for example. In some of the energetic work I do, for example, the eco-intention, which we talk about in one of the Merry Musings, where we're working with large scale systems, so like large areas of land or organizations, we can also use crop circles if that's what the organization asks for. When you douse it, it might pick out a certain crop circle that you can use to help balance the organizational system or the area of land that you're working with. So the idea being they have a certain frequency, essentially, not all the same, all different, and those can interact in different ways with our system and the kind of information fields around us. So many people report sound when they go into crop circles. They certainly report sound when they're being made, and we'll come to that in a bit. But people also report sound when they go into the crop circles themselves. The theory is that those could be electromagnetic frequencies that are stimulating the hypothalamus, activating the cilia in the ear, which would give you the impression of hearing something. Other people have reported recovering from partial hearing losses when they go into crop circles. So there's a sound element to it as well somewhere. And light. So lots of reports of people, particularly kind of when it gets darker, or if they've seen them form in the dark, reports of small pulsing tiny lights shaped like a donut. Remember that, donut, like a torus, or like a blood cell. And they are common in the crop circles as well as in the formation process. During formation, you often hear this kind of what people describe as an electromagnetic sound that goes along with seeing these kind of lights. So the electromagnetism theme, so the pattern obviously in this crop circle is like a filings. If you were to put them between two magnetic poles, you would see the filings arrange themselves in this kind of a way. So people have experienced their hotel cards being white blank, phone batteries emptying, and people with electromagnetic, measuring tools can pick up the different frequencies within the crop circles themselves. So there's definitely something going on in the electromagnetic dimension. Other people and groups have actually managed to intend in their understanding of things, intend a picture to emerge in a crop circle and for it to actually appear later on. So this one of the door, for example, was requested by Sue Drury in 2018 in June, and it appeared a month later. So she had quite a clear picture in her mind, and was, I think it was with her son, she was kind of experimenting and playing with this idea of could we manifest a crop circle. One important question is, so is it indeed their intention that brings the crop circle into form, or was the crop circle coming anyway and the pattern existed already in the information fields and people just picked up on it? We don't really know because the question itself assumes a linearity in time, and we know when we're working in the informational dimensions that linearity as such doesn't exist. So one might say it co-arises in their consciousness and on the field at the same time, even if there is in our linear world, material world, even if there is apparent time in between those two. Another thing they found about crop circles is that they often emerge at the intersection of ley lines, telluric currents, and water sources. Ley lines are the lines that seem to connect kind of sacred sites in what seem to be straight lines. Telluric currents are the energy electromagnetic currents running through the earth. And then you've got the water sources. So James Lyons says the water sources are the source of energy, which rises in bubble rings from below, creating crop patterns as the crop is flattened. So the idea is that the kind of water that's under the surface comes up through the surface in what he's called a bubble ring that, again, we'll see looks like a torus. And that's what creates the crop patterns as the crop is flattened by this process, which we'll describe a bit more in a minute. Now, we know that water carries and holds information, and that information shows up as patterns, often related to sacred geometry. So, for example, that experiment where you have some sand on top of a loudspeaker and you play a certain tone through it, and then the sand organizes itself into a geometric pattern. And this example of the image at the bottom is, of course, Emoto's work, where he found that water, when he created water crystals out of water that had been charged with certain words or intention, that he got these geometric patterns. So in the picture below, you can see the water crystal that came out of an intention of love and gratitude. And then on the right, you can see a crop circle from 2005 that reflects very closely that pattern as well. So could it be that the water somehow is being informed by something, and that information is creating the patterns that show up? Interestingly enough, all of Britain's 13,000 medieval churches are built on the crossover points of telluric energy lines. So somebody knew somewhere that these were important places, and these also seem to be the places where the crop circles show up. So to come on to James Lyons's theory on crop circles, Lyons was a chartered engineer whose specialism was in aeronautical research. He's based in Yorkshire. And so he, very grounded chap. And this was his, as he looked into it all, his theory of how the creation of the crop circles worked. And to understand it, we need to be talking about three different kinds of waves. On the one hand, sound waves, that as you look at that picture of the slinky, travel down the slinky, as it were, in pulses, sound waves, longitudinal waves. Electromagnetic waves, where the wave moves up and down, so the energy is transported not in a kind of flat pulse through it, but in a wave form as the coils move up and down. And then what he calls torsion waves that look much more like a torus, as you can see in the image here. So these three kind of waves seem to be involved in the creation process of these crop circles. So this is how he describes it. This torsion wave, toroidal form, emerges from the earth where a crop circle is formed. So that toroidal form is the one at the bottom there. These bubble rings, as he also calls them, these bubble rings rise to the surface and are created from electric strikes to underground water sources. So essentially there's some kind of electromagnetic impulse into the water in the earth, and that creates this form that you can see on the bottom left, where half of the ring is underground, half of this torsion wave, and half of the torsion wave is above ground. Like bubbles in the water, they rise to the surface, and on breaking through, just as soap bubbles pop, so do these wave rings of energy. The collapsing bubble, with its significantly lower pressure inside than outside, so it's created this bubble from the water, it's got low pressure inside, and then the pressure of the atmosphere pushing down on the outside. When it collapses, it sucks down the crop in a very controlled manner. And this results in the crop circle form. So he says it's like a crop circle is a frozen in time wave, a frozen in time torsion wave. And energy waves like this are imprinted with information. So these two things, you have information that is defining the kind of form that will show up, carried on energy waves. So energy is essentially information in movement. Information shows up in these geometric forms. So what is happening is the water has information in it, and as the steam, as it were, comes above in this bubble above the surface of the earth and then collapses, that informational pattern that was in the water is reflected in matter through the crop. And he also did some calculations around how big a circle should be, you would expect, and how long it would take to make, using all kind of existing scientific measurements. And he says the size of the circle depends on the depth from which it's generated and the angle of the cone, so when it comes out through the earth, which dictates how the cone size grows in moving to the surface. So why aren't they all round, one might ask, if this is indeed what happens? Because the pattern that is in this bubble ring, or is in the kind of top half of in the toroidal information field here, the pattern that needs to show up for that information might not be circular. So although the emergence of the system as a whole is circular, the actual crop that gets flattened itself doesn't need to be circular, because the information pattern itself might not be circular. So he goes on. With the electrical phenomena involved are often directly visible in the form of both spiraling columns of energy, akin to a vertical slinky toy wave motion. You remember the one we saw earlier in the talk? So the waves going up and down, spiraling columns of energy vertical, as it were, to the earth. And in addition, small balls of light are sometimes seen moving along the energy lines associated with the basic grid layout of the crop formation. So again, electromagnetic phenomena. The triggering force is electrical in nature, the triggering force, but its strikes to earth release what are essentially acoustic waves from underground water. So you've got the electromagnetic coming into the earth, creating resonance, as it were, and it's that which triggers the water. And as the water rises, it's creating acoustic waves, so sound-like waves from the underground water. And that's what leads to the pattern formation. So remember, going back to the example of the sound, with the sand on the speaker, and the sound then creates that pattern on the speaker. Well, it's those kind of patterns that we see in the crop circles. And we know that sound is a denser form of energy than electricity, than the electromagnetic field. So sound, and remember in the Bible, it's the first thing that God does is speak the word. So it's a sound frequency that creates the manifestation, leads to the manifestation. So we've got this interface between the electromagnetic impulse that activates the water in this toroidal form that, as it collapses, creates this acoustic wave that informs the pattern on the that manifests on the crop, basically. So that would explain why people see both light, they hear electromagnetic sounds, and they hear, pick up sounds sometimes when they're actually in the crop circles. Now you see, when people go in to measure these energy fields at stone circles, you see very similar energy fields, but they're more stable. So they're kind of stone circles in a way are like permanent crop circles. But you can pick up these columnar vortices, so this vertical vortex of the electromagnetic field at the center of the circles, and at other nodal points on the grid system. So where the telluric lines cross, for example, you'll be able to pick up these vertical vortices of electromagnetic energy. But the question is, which came first, the stone circles or the crop circles? Now, people often think the stone circles, because, crop circles are a relatively recent phenomenon, what, 1970s or so was it? However, there are records of like a long time ago of people reporting crop circles, but of course they didn't have helicopters and things then, so couldn't go up and see them. But in different journals and kind of old publications, they have found people describing what sounds very much like a crop circle. So could it be that people built stone circles at places where lots of crop circles seem to appear? So as a way to kind of honor this mysterious process of these shapes just occurring in the crops, did people then choose to build their stone circles at those places to remind themselves, or just to honor the place, create a permanent crop circle, essentially. So I've touched on this a bit. So how come you get all these different patterns then? Well, a bit of a musing here. What if it's collective consciousness that imprints the water with information that is expressed in a certain pattern with the sound waves. So when the torus wave emerges from the earth, it's holding that information in the water. And so when it bursts and flattens the crop, it ends up making that pattern in the field. So this one on the right here is one, of course, that people have analyzed as being the COVID virus. So it could be that, you know, at that point, it was a very strong topic, as it were, in the collective consciousness. And that's why it then showed up in the crop circle, because the collective consciousness had informed the water, which is, you know, which held the pattern, as it were, which then when it burst, created this particular form. Could that be how it works? Maybe. So crop circles often arise at the intersection of ley lines, these straight lines that connect up different sacred sites, telluric currents, the electromagnetic energies in the earth, and water sources. This is Lyons' theory. So twin underground telluric currents. So they seem to go in pairs, these earth energy lines. In this case, this one that's illustrated here is what's called the Michael and Mary lines, after the number of churches dedicated to either Mary or St. Michael found along this line. So lots of churches along this line dedicated to Mary or Michael, and they weave around a central overground midline. So if you see the kind of ley line running across with the churches and things, that runs in a straight line. If you analyze the telluric energy lines, they kind of go in this snake-like, you know, alteration between the different lines. This reveals the primal caduceus pattern, like on the kind of, you know, the twin serpents that go up the staff of a healer. The primal caduceus pattern that can be found within all true leys. A triple fold axis composed of masculine, feminine, and spirit currents, which may be experienced by the practicing geomancer as containing information in the thinking, feeling, and spirit realms, respectively. So here, in a way, we also have the Trinity, again, reflected in these lines. That came from a quote from landandspirit.net. So could it have gone like this? Telluric currents weave through the earth in generally straight lines, in these pairs, seemingly the masculine, the feminine, the yin, the yang. And that crop circles seem to form at the intersection of these currents and where there are water sources. So let's imagine that that has been happening, you know, ever since the earth has existed, ever since grass has been there for patterns to emerge in. And that ancient peoples built megalithic monuments and then later on churches to honor the repeated appearance of the circles. So telluric currents first, that they provide the places for the crop circles to be able to form. People notice the crop circles, they build monuments. They become sacred locations because of the mystery of what happens there. Later on, churches and things are built on top of them. And then those monuments, which are the things people are able to see later on, end up being the lines that connect them end up being called ley lines, because people start to notice that all these churches and these sacred sites are connected up in straight lines, whereas and so we call them ley lines. Ultimately, what they are reflections of the telluric currents in the earth that had triggered the emergence of the crop circles and led to the monuments being built on these kind of popular locations, as it were. So there's a musing. Maybe that's how the whole story worked. So here's an eyewitness report of the formation of a crop circle that's going to lead us on to how this reflects the evolution process. So this was somebody who saw this this crop circle you can see on the left form near Stonehenge. So that's Stonehenge. You can see at the top of the photo on the left, and then on the other side of the road, this crop circle formed. She says there was a mist. So this is the water. There was a mist about 2 to 3 feet off the ground. And it was sort of spinning around, spinning. Ooh, Tauruses spin. And on the ground, the circular shape was appearing, which seemed to get bigger and bigger. And simultaneously, the mist got bigger and bigger and swirled faster. It took 20 minutes to form, which matches Lyons' expectations based on the size and number of circles, which he calculated based on the Earth's gravitational and magnetic fields. So I won't go into the calculations there, but he has a theory on how long it should take to form. And the time this woman said this one took to form reflected his theory. So Lyons would go on to say the descending force emits an electrical discharge, which releases the bubbles from the underground aquifers, which rise up through the surface of the ground, and the patterns are formed. Then he says these patterns develop like embroidery, half above the ground and half under the ground in a sort of looping manner. So it's like the energy goes up over the ground, curves down, goes back under, goes back, just like as if you were stitching. And there is significantly less pressure inside than outside the kind of bubble. And therefore, there's a sort of sucking motion from inside, which bends or sucks down the crop at the base. Remember, they are never broken. Nobody is quite sure how these things get bent into form without the crop itself being damaged in any way. But that's a good way of assessing whether it's a fake one or whether it's an original one. So this is interesting. When I was reading this, it was okay. So this is the process is starting to sound familiar. So for those who aren't familiar with the evolutionary process, that's a torus you can see at the top. What you'll notice is that there are 2 poles, top and the bottom, in a creative tension with each other. There is a field or a brain or a membrane around the outside, and then manifesting at a 90-degree plane in the middle is a galaxy. This is how galaxies form. The image at the bottom is a 2D kind of flat description of the toroidal process from Volution Theory, suggesting that there is a creative tension between the seed, which is the present moment, the potential, which is the possibility. That creates a tension. Think about the word intention, put something into tension. And that's what brings information through into increasingly dense form through the subtle into the gross or manifest. And the container around the outside is like the brain that you can see at the top. You've got the dynamics that go on in between that, because that brain, so the evolution theory goes, that brain holds all the potential information of this system, of what it could become. And that information is carried on energy waves through the torus until at some point those energy waves become so coherent that they click in as standing waves and create matter in this way that we can actually experience with our normal senses. So there's again a trinity of the container, the dynamics, and manifested in evolution theory. I show how that trinity maps to all the traditions, spiritual traditions, and the religions. So that's the evolution process. Now, the patterns developing like embroidery, half above the ground and half under the ground in a sort of looping manner. So this sucking process, there's a significantly less pressure. The sucking motion from inside is like if you're looking at the bottom image here, it's like the tension between the 2 poles that then kind of collapses information into form, in formation. collapses information into form, and then you get this manifestation at the 90-degree plane on the surface of the Earth. So the torus is at a kind of 180-degree angle to the Earth, as it were, the vertical vortex. And then as it clicks into form, it manifests at this 90-degree plane, just in the way that a galaxy does in the top picture there. So this is my words, the tension field between heaven and earth. So the electrical coming down and the water creates the crop circle manifestation in matter at the 90-degree plane. And I was just thinking just before this, just because I was sitting down with this just before we started, that could this also be related to intention and attention? Intention, as I've talked about before, is what provides information into the field. So when you have an intention, essentially you're uploading information to the field. Attention is the life energy that you lend or give to that intention. So intention is much more mind, and attention is much more heart-based. And so could we be seeing here like a combination of the intention through the electrical and the attention through the sound? Or is there some way that because the electrical seems to inform the water, right? Anyway, just is there a relationship there? So the suggestion would be that the collective consciousness influences the information fields, like in the Princeton experiments that I refer to in some of the earlier Merry Musings. And so the pattern that emerges in the crop circle formation process. So it could be collective consciousness. It could also be individual intention, right? So volution means spin. This is what is described by the eyewitness. This whole system is spinning like a torus. Is the attention like the electric, or the intention like the sound? And remember, this was her description. A mist 2 to 3 feet off the ground, a sort of spinning around. And on the ground, the circular shape was appearing at that 90-degree plane, seemed to get bigger and bigger. Simultaneously, the mist got bigger and bigger and swirled faster. So the spinning process that's very typical of a toroidal dynamic and the evolutionary manifestation process. So one of the key aspects of the manifestation process is this idea of a creative tension between poles. So Lyons describes here from the top of the hemisphere covering a crop circle. So if you look at the top image on the left, you could imagine that swirl in the middle, the galactic swirl, being the crop circle, right? And there's this hemisphere over it and a hemisphere under it of the torus. So from the top of the hemisphere covering a crop circle, there is a nodal point akin to the pole of a magnet. Needless to say, there is a complementary entry structure below, just like in the image at the top. So we've got a creative tension field between the two poles that is leading to the manifestation of the circles. He says it's not the force of gravity that holds the cosmos together, it's the electric force generated by spinning electric charges. So he's kind of now linking it to a bigger theory about the cosmos. These in turn are best modeled mathematically as closed standing waves around a virtual toroid. This in turn forms a dipole field, so a field with two poles, not unlike a battery, which is what we're looking at here. So I dove into that a little bit because in the book they make reference to the electric universe theory. I didn't have time to look into it properly. It's refuted pretty substantially by kind of traditional scientists in terms of the theory they have about the sun and things. Doesn't seem to hold up. However, my intuition tells me that they're describing different dimensions of reality. Yeah, so one of the things they looked into and they talk about in the book, and it seems that Lyons is a proponent of, is in the electric universe theory. And I did look into it a little bit, didn't have time to go into it properly. Their theories around the sun and things have been pretty well refuted by scientists online. So it doesn't hold up when you apply it to the kind of Newtonian physics perspective. But as I've discussed in earlier Merry Musings, there are different dimensions. So you have the material dimension, and then we have the more subtle informational realms, in which different laws apply. So the quantum laws and the laws, in terms of energetics, where we don't have linearity of time or space, apply in the informational realm. So maybe this electric universe theory is more of a description of a different dimension than, let's say, the kind of traditional physics is, but that's something that needs to be looked into more. However, it does, this process that he's describing here in terms of the formation process of the crop circles does seem to reflect that electric universe theory. And then he says the two key words are implosion instead of gravity, which has everything to do with columnar vortices. So remember, the bubble comes up over the Earth, it implodes because of the differential pressure, and related to this, the vertical vortices, like we would see in the torus here. And cymatics is what I was referring to when I talked about the patterns that appear in sand on top of a speaker which music is played through. That's what they call cymatics. So it's the sound waves. So the cymatics, which are responsible for the combination of frequencies determining the patterns, right? So on the one hand, it's the collapsing through the steam of this water that folds the crops, and the pattern is determined by the audio waves, the sound waves, the cymatics, which creates the pattern in the crop. And that pattern could be informed by many different things. As I'm suggesting, it could be by the collective consciousness, something that's particularly in people's awareness at a certain time, or it could be a group of people who are very consciously sending an intention, which of course is another way of charging the information fields. So it could be any of those ways that the patterns, or if nobody's doing anything in particular, it might just be a particular pattern that reflects certain dynamic in the there are certain in the place, a certain pattern of the place. So the energy of crop circles has this electric charge, and in this respect, the energy spirals like a tornado, right? So here we have again the torus process, like a tornado, which reveals its electric origin as filamentary structures rising vertically. So if you look down the bottom right, you'll also see a picture of a black hole around a galaxy that looks very similar. This is the basis of crop circle generation. In addition, within crop circles, there are far narrower yet similar structures emerging from the Earth's grid line structures at nodal points. So if there are, so the pattern, as it were, is often repeated at different points within the crop circle. And he also says, we know from the effects on pilots' instruments, so pilots who fly across the crop circles, that there is a vertical field of energy that extends to an unknown height above the circles. What they've also noticed is birds tend to fly around the crop circles. So they're picking up, they navigate with this electromagnetic field, that when they see these vortices, or they sense these vortices of electromagnetic energy in the crop circles, they fly around them. So again, this process of crop circle manifestation seems to relate as a fundamental pattern to the way that life is manifested as a whole, at the biggest to the smallest level. So come back to this embroidery image, because this is another thing that reflects the Volution theory. It says these patterns develop like embroidery, half above the ground and half under the ground, in a sort of looping manner. So it seems to be going kind of up into the manifest and then down into the unmanifest, back up into the manifest, down into the unmanifest. And you might remember in Volution, part of the Volution theory is that in order for us to be able to take a next step in time, we have to go back in time to heal something that is holding the information that enables us to take that next step. So it's a looping from the kind of the present as we reach into the future that shines more light on the shadow, as it were, that pulls us back into the past to release some energy that enables the next step to be formed or shaped. So that dynamic that they describe here with this kind of looping made me think very much of this evolutionary process around the looping, in this case, in the time dimension between past and future. So remember, I often use the tree image to say it's like if the tree wants to send its branches higher, it has to send its roots deeper. So the underground and the above ground, as it were, or the past and the future being connected in a way that's not as linear as our current reality would have us believe. Or this process of, if we're wanting to stretch up for greater freedom, then we have to stretch down for greater integration, you know? So again, the tree image, and then we have this impulse to grow, light descends, we get this looping, as it were, where the shadow is enlightened. We have to integrate that shadow that releases the energy that enables us to grow. And one other data point, as it were, on all of this is from The Sacred Network by Chris Hardy, where she describes what goes on at these energetic crossing points. And this is how she pictures it, right? She calls them rising vortices of electromagnetic energy being detectable above sacred sites and crop circles. So you see here these, what she calls cosmotelluric lines, essentially, ascending and descending into the earth, which are really amplified at the crossing point of these energy lines. So this would reflect, again, exactly the process that we've just been talking about. And apparently the pineal gland, which we're not going to go into now, but a lot of people have written lots of things about, is particularly good at detecting this kind of energy. So again, it requires a stilling of the rational analyzer in our minds, and to create space for the more intuitive sensing to be able to feel the energies of these spaces. And as I describe in The Pain and the Promise, Merry Musing, and a number of the ones that follow that, ancient peoples used to sense much more with their right brain and their intuitive knowing. So would have been able to pick up the energy at these places. And they obviously feeling that these places had a certain quality to them, which may be also why they built different sacred objects or circles at these places. But that sensing is what we transcended and repressed in the West, as we kind of liberated our rational mind, as it were, but forgot to take with us that sensing capacity that would have allowed us to more intuitively feel. Now, what we do actually pick this information up when we're at these places or feel it. We just have what they call gating mechanisms to filter it out, because we've either educationally or culturally been made to believe that it's not relevant information. And so the system filters out, what is apparently not relevant, so that we can focus on the things that apparently are relevant. But so part of the process of being able to do this work, be able to work consciously, with the energies of the land, like as we discussed in the geomancy Merry Musing last time, is being able to remove some of the gating that has been programmed culturally and educationally about what is real and what we can actually sense and pick up, and the validity of that information that we pick up as well. So a couple more to close then. This is Lyons again. Let us remind ourselves that there are only two topological structures that are relevant to all creation. The torus, that should be an O, by the way, not an AU. The torus and a spherical shell. Two structures relevant to all creation, the torus and a spherical shell. There we go, there's volution again. Around these are wound spirals of filamentary structures. They can be cross-wound such that we have right-hand and left-hand spirals, often interleaved. All told, they form a toroid. The whole result looks just like a ball of string with its central hole. It is the interleaving of the left and right-hand spiral that it is the interleaving of the right and left-hand spiral, I think, that dictates, sorry, there's a typo there, that dictates the effect of earth energies on living matter, on living things. So if you think about what that really means, there's these two core, in a way, DNA strands, the right and left-hand spirals, or this core yin and this core yang, or in the kind of Anglo-Saxon tradition, the fire and the ice, these two fundamental aspects that differentiate through their interaction into the multiplicity and diversity that is life on Earth. That it is the way that those interweave and interleave with each other that determines the patterns that emerge. So the basic nesting of the spirals dictates all living matter. So it's nice because he brings it back to, this isn't just about crop circles, but what the crop circles seem to be reflecting to us is the actual manifestation process of life on Earth. So a last quote here. This is, I think, the biggest crop circle that has ever shown up. The Julia set came in near Stonehenge in 2001, and many people witnessed this forming over a period of 25 minutes. That also reflects Lyons' calculations. So this overall pattern is synonymous with the generic structure of the galaxy. So in addition, the hemispherical cloud, which is the top of the torus, that the mist, as it were, that hangs over the crop formation as it's coming into shape, has a clear gap between the lower surface and the ground. So that's the, there's a bit of space between that cloud of mist, as it were, that toroidal form at the top, and the 90-degree plane within which it manifests. And he says that that very, very much reflects the creation process of many galaxies. It is so true to say, as above, so below. This formation process has everything to do with the creation of all matter, including ourselves. So there we go. That's how the crop circles wrap it all together.